Hello, everyone. So, we are finally reaching the end of 2020. It's been an eventful year. It's been a year which definitely will be one of the most unforgettable years for perhaps decades to come. And I'm here with Tina Thakur, my colleague who uh, who covers healthcare and pharma. And for both of us, 2020 personally also has been a year where we have sort of put all our strength together to bring you stories and reporting on what was happening with COVID 19, right from the time of diagnostics to treatment and now vaccines. So, Tina, what an eventful year it has been, hasn't been?
I'll start by saying that there were challenges in the way we communicate because it was a normal situation. It was the world was seeing the greatest health emergency, and so as a reporter, we needed to be careful, watchful, and yet follow the best practices while we were out for reporting. I'm very happy that we continue to work through this crisis, providing our readers the news, expert views, and informed analysis in the newspaper and also for online. Yeah, hard times, but I think we managed well.
Absolutely. I remember that, I'm sure it was April when things were just flowing in, so many information that was coming in. Both me and Tina were writing like 5 stories each. And right, and we were working perhaps 24/7, all because I think Tina also shares this whole idea that journalism is a public service and we had to put out stories for our readers irrespective of the print was picking up or not, because this was the first record of history that we were putting out, and we wanted to write irrespective of whether it was picked up or not.
The art of reporting changed. Earlier, you'll meet people, and that's addiction for us because meeting people, getting documents, that feeling was missing somewhere. And then there was this constant flow of news. People were confused, they were desperate, and the work in hand was how to not create panic but equip them with hard facts. So a lot was at stake, but I think we managed, and though it was difficult.
Tina, I want to ask you about this whole the policy making of COVID-19, which has guided the measures in India. We had a task force that was set up, which had, of course, experts and everybody, but still it was primarily driven by civil servants. We saw that even in Bombay. Uh, in hindsight, now looking at things, there were so many disagreements about certain measures, such as the use of hydroxychloroquine as one of the treatment options, and the quarantining policies. Should people with mild symptoms shouldn't be hospital or not? So many things kept changing. Uh, what do you think? Do you think government did not do its homework well because it had examples from Italy and China to sort of look for?
But I think those were wrong examples to rely on. India is a different, peculiar country. We just couldn't take decisions based on other countries and all. Though there were some, at hindsight, I'll see that if I look back, there are problems. Government could have involved more epidemiologists, more experts. But somehow I feel that I was looking at my stories, the kind of stories that I've done in a year, how the situation was evolving. Even the government had no clue what was happening. So they decided to take some certain actions as the situation evolved. I remember in January we were writing about coronavirus in China and how it had impacted our drug industry here. And suddenly in February we had this case. So everything just changed like overnight. So they were working hard. There were some groups which were made. Of course, there could have been things which could have been done differently. But I would not say that government didn't do anything. They were doing as the situation was evolving.
It's perhaps might be a bit too unfair to say that the government did not completely do its job. However, I think from my experience from reporting again from Maharashtra and Bombay was that the communication from the central government was very scanty in terms of there were great policies that was being formed, but when the actual information reaching to state government, because health continues to be a state subject, the information did not really reach out at the correct time to to municipal organizations, municipal offices, and to state governments, which sort of delayed lot of implementation. For example, in Bombay, we saw the whole quarantine policies, the hospital bed situation. It was so terrible. I mean, I'm sure you were getting calls personally in Delhi about people not finding beds. In Bombay, it was even worse, where the transportation was shut. People almost died. Rather, people died on their way to hospitals. So, and private hospitals were completely shut down, not taking any patients. So there was a lack of communication between the state and the central government, I think, which of course sort of got ironed out in the subsequent months. But would you agree that the communication from the central side?
Yeah, I think this has always been the case, because when it comes from center, the center would say that state is a health subject. So health is a state subject. So the state government would know it better. So, trickling it down from center to states, obviously every state had their own peculiar problems, and also that was a major concern. In fact, when this migration happened, there were a lot of policies which were changing, and then they were coming out with some SOPs, and then they were changed. So there was a lot of confusion, because in fact they also didn't know what to do. So as I said, that the situation was evolving. They were trying their hard, but you never know what is the best.
The biggest intervention, non-pharmaceutical intervention of this pandemic across the world has been lockdown. I mean, this is something which has been debated whether it should have been done or not done. Our own government's justification is that if we hadn't gone for the lockdown, we would have lost several number of lives than what we have seen today. Do you think the implementation of the whole lockdown could have been much better planned?
Yeah, that's what I feel. I remember when we were going for these press conferences, and we could see it coming. I remember asking a joint secretary in one of those press briefings that, are we heading for a lockdown? And the reply was complete no. And then after 2 days, this lockdown was announced, because we could see it coming, that, suddenly they had disrupted airlines, everything had got disrupted. Then they were talking about public transport, and we could just see it coming, that there is a lockdown which we are heading for, but they were not ready to just say that in those many words. I remember tweeting it then, and there was this a very senior person in the government who called me and said that, why are you creating panic? There is no talk about and no discussion about lockdown at this point in time. And the next day, after 2 days, it was announced. So that would have been, of course, better for people, for their policy and decision making as well, which I think there was definitely, I don't think that it was taken in a haste, but they could have done it better.
Right. I think the whole pandemic response has so much to do with communication, and this is where there's been a big gap in how governments, I mean, not just India, but across the world have reacted, and perhaps not done a great job. Lockdowns especially, I think we all thought that this was going to be a 1-month lockdown, but before we knew, it got extended, and it went on getting extended, and it just seemed like you will endlessly be, jailed inside your homes, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So for me, it was like, taking China's experience in hand. I was just thinking that maybe 3 months, everything will be fine. So from when this happened, I was like, by June, everything will be fine, and we'll be out, and, things will be back to normal. But then it just went on and on and on and on. And I think even in government, nobody had this clue. Nobody knew what was happening. So there were, of course, mathematical studies and those modelings which were being done. But I don't think there was any which proved at that point in time correct.
Right.
So people were making assumptions, but nothing worked.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a city like Bombay, we are still technically in some sort of a lockdown. The suburban trains, which is the lifeline of the city, is still shut for most number of people, and until and unless that resumes, normal life cannot resume in Bombay. So, of course, I mean, the way lockdown has impacted other things around, especially the public transportation, which has taken away employment of so many people. The restaurants have opened up, the malls have opened up, but people who work in these places, they still do not have a mode of transport to reach, isn't
And I
it?
think worse is the mental health,
That's
which
right.
has taken a toll,
Yeah.
which has completely taken a toll. Because I remember talking to psychiatrists and psychologists for stories, and how people would just panic because they had lost jobs, they didn't know what was happening, and they just, you know, if you live in a small house with three people, it gets like sometimes some people get on your nerves. So it was so difficult getting adjusted to that atmosphere, that you are just sitting at one place, not going out, not interacting with people. So everything just changed for them. So I think
Absolutely.
mental health was equally important, and that had taken a toll.
Before we go to vaccines, I think we should also perhaps talk about some of the success stories that sort of emerged from the pandemic. And I think one thing which I would like to sort of share, which I thought is something which is again also made global headlines, is how Dharavi, which was the epicenter in Bombay of the COVID pandemic, managed to control the spread. It's amazing because the way the assistant commissioner Kiran Digvikar, who sort of ran the entire show, it's amazing to see that this was a spot which everybody thought would be a ticking time bomb. I mean, if the maximum number of deaths would be coming, if the pandemic went out of control, it would be from Dharavi because of the entire social cultural the setup of the place. But the way Dharavi did it, I think it has a great example. Just to kind of quickly wrap up, I mean, about how Dharan went about is that with my conversation with the assistant commissioner is that there was the whole community that came together. When most private hospitals within Bombay were shutting shops, in Dharavi, some of the private hospitals came forward and gave their beds to the municipal offices. They said, we will run the show, but take over the hospital, but we will give you the staff. I think it was an amazing intervention that happened, how the community came together. You saw that, the door-to-door screening which was happening of senior citizens, the small clinics within Dharavi sort of stood out, and they took it upon themselves to go and screen people and give them the correct intervention when needed. So what you understand from people, I mean, what I understand from speaking from people who are in Dharavi is that they take immense pride in how the community managed to tackle the crisis. And now if you see in entire Bombay, Dharavi continues to record single cases. So I think we should also talk about the success story. So I think from my side, I would say that the way Dharavi managed to sort of bring the infection spread under control is one of the models that perhaps should be sort of emulated in many places across the world. What do you think, Katina? What do you think?
For me, I think it was when the pandemic or when the cases started to hit the Andaman tribe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the most heart-wrenching thing, because there are only few people, and it's very difficult to communicate with them. And when it affected them, I thought that we had just lost it, because now it's going to kill everyone. So how Andaman and Nicobar, these people, Andaman Island, how they did it, I think that was also a remarkable job that they had done, because there as well that, I got to know from sources and from my officers who were posted there, how they just, joined hands and worked for the tribe. And then within few days, there was not a single case which was present in Andaman.
What about the testing expansion of India? I think this is something, despite all the initial hiccups, the way India expanded testing is something that, and this is mostly to do with the manufacturers. I mean, government, of course, came in, but I think the Indian manufacturers, the way they sort of rose to the occasion is something also a commendable thing to talk about, isn't it?
That's true. I remember the first press conference when we were called by the ICMR DG, and he was talking about how everything, whatever the primers and everything was imported, and they were getting it from Germany. And he said that we won't be able to expand testing because of these kind of hiccups that we have. And suddenly we see a lot of companies coming in and doing whatever best they could. So yeah, I think they really rose to occasion, and they did a remarkable job. And now, as you know, that we have started exporting, a lot of from PPE to diagnostic kits and all. So yeah, they did a remarkable job as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to vaccines, which so many people are anxiously waiting to know. You've been tracking the subject expert committee and the drug controller. I've been talking to the vaccine makers on their plans. But let me first kind of come to you about the whole regulatory side of it. What are you understanding, picking up from your sources from the drug regulator and subject expert committee?
So of course there is immense pressure. We want to just roll it out as ASAP, but the problem is that they have their hands tied up because they have to look at some data which the companies are supposed to provide. We just did a story today that Serum Institute of India and Pfizer has already applied for emergency authorization. So we'll just have to see how it pans out because ball is in the court of drug controller, but then he has to be really, really careful before he gives a go ahead. So we'll just have to see how it pans out in days to come.
Absolutely. I think it makes sense because safety should be the paramount factor, and for any regulator, that comes as the first thing. I think from the company's side, the Serum Institute, we've been talking to them quite regularly. We've also been talking to the rest of the other vaccine makers. Just to give an update to our viewers, we have right now 4 vaccine candidates that are in advanced stage. They are in human clinical trial. Serum, Bharat Biotech, Zydus are in advanced stage. There's of course Dr. Reddy's that is doing the trial for the Sputnik vaccine, the vaccine from Russia. So we have 4 candidates. We know for a fact, and Serum has gone on record saying that they have manufactured already 40 million doses, and if at all, even when they get the approval, they will be ready to sort of roll out the distribution side of things. We also understand from Bharat Biotech that they have started on their phase 3 trial where they have halfway marked with their recruitment. But I think all eyes are in Serum Institute of India, and what the regulators are also waiting for is a nod from the UK's MHRA, isn't it, Tina?
Yes, but you never know that Pfizer may win the race.
Absolutely. Yeah, Pfizer already has it. Now, another thing which we have been writing about, Tina, both you and me have written about this in our stories, is that should India have signed pre-purchasing agreement with vaccine makers like Pfizer and Moderna, who already have it, considering that we started late with the clinical trials. You see countries like Dubai, Singapore already, of course, the Western countries have already started it, but we see Dubai, Singapore have also started vaccination with the Pfizer vaccine. Should India have signed up some sort of a pre-purchasing agreement with these companies?
Where is the money?
Okay.
What we got to know from our government sources is that they're ready to spend like $1 to $2, for which they can get Serum, but not Pfizer, of course. Pfizer is $19.50 a dose or 2 doses in US. So even if they come to some, what could it be? It can't be $2. So government is it's banking on the indigenous production. They are thinking that by the time they roll out maybe say Serum, they'll have Bharat Biotech, and then probably there'll be Zydus. So they don't want to, as of now, they don't want to get into those agreements because they think that we have enough and they have these prioritized groups where they will, which will be inoculated first. So I think they are just taking their time. Then they are also dependent on COVAX facility for getting free doses. So what I get to know from my sources is that we have enough, and we don't need to, get into those agreements.
Also, another thing about the expectations, let's also, again, which we have been writing in our stories and through our videos, we've been keeping the expectations right about how much time will it actually take for the entire India to get vaccinated. When we speak to vaccine experts like Gagandeep Kang, and you also speak to people who are in the vaccination side of it, and they tell me is that it will take at least till end of 2021, at least. And this is a very much optimistic scenario, till that the entire country, or even let's say 40% of the country to get vaccinated.
I think much more than 2021. And in fact, they are not even looking at vaccinating everyone in the country. So they have their own prioritized groups, which will be inoculated first, and then if something is left, then only it will come in private market. That's what the feeling that the government is giving, that it won't be open for because there'll be issues like black marketing and all. So what they are planning is that it won't be available in private market for say at least 6 months or say next year, and then probably after they are done with the priority groups, then they'll make it available in the private market. So I think it's more than 2021. 2021 will be for just the priority groups. That's what I feel.
Right. And what we understand is by until June 2021, the government has ordered around 30 million doses or 300 million doses for its to vaccinate 20% of its population. Serum is ready to sell it in the private market. Most pharma companies that we speak to are ready to sell it in the private market. Their argument is that if the government is not ready to procure all the doses which they are ready to manufacture, why not give them the permission to sell it in the private market?
That's
we
true,
also
but,
saw.
But the government always has an upper hand because they can
Absolutely.
always. You remember when Bedaquiline was for TB was only introduced in their program and not otherwise, not in the private setting. So they can do whatever.
Absolutely.
They can always restrict it. So we
Absolutely.
have to see how it happens.
Yeah. There's also been industry representation. We've seen some of the lobby groups from India Inc. who have, in a policy paper, have recommended that that companies should be allowed to use their CSR funds to vaccinate their own employees, which means basically opening it up for the private use.
So Divya, as you know, that we have another problem which has emerged in the last few days. We have a new entrant, new mutant which has come from UK. How worried should we be? Because a lot of flights though we have restricted it for a short time, but then how worried we should be?
So
because given how we do our gene sequencing and whether we have been doing it or not, so how worried a country like India should be?
Right. So, Tina, as you had reported recently, and we've also been reporting, speaking to gene scientists, is that what I gathered is that the new mutation is not a cause of worry yet, because we don't have enough evidence about how devastating this is going to be. What we know right now from talking to genetic experts is that this is a mutation which is highly infectious, 70% more infectious, but it's not as deadly as the previous mutations have been. Also, to remember is that this is not the first time that we have seen the mutation of this kind. Something similar was seen in Australia in July, but we didn't see that kind of panic at that time happening. But this time, the worry seems to be that this mutation is sort of becoming a dominant form of mutation in UK, where the new infections are coming in. So, and also the mutation, this one which is taking place in something called the spike protein of the virus, and this is what most vaccine makers are also targeting. So the question is that besides infectiousness, are there implications for vaccines? Will vaccines be effective or not against this new mutation? But what we understand right now is that vaccines will work, and this is what our government have said that, and this is what scientists have also been telling us, isn't it? So there are interesting days, and I think 2020 has taught us so many things, Tina. I mean, this is perhaps going to be the most memorable time of our reporting careers, and 2020.
It's really a peculiar time.
Absolutely.
And I think history will remember the coronavirus through the reports filed by journalists like us all across the globe. Many of us have put our health and lives at risk in covering the pandemic. So I think I'll always remember this is once in a lifetime opportunity.
Absolutely, Tina, I would agree with you. And we have more reporting to do with the vaccines coming in. We will be tracking the distribution of vaccines. And of course, we will be keeping our readers and viewers informed, as we've been doing in the last 11 months. Thank you so much for watching.